As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Sleeping with the Numbers podcast. This is being recorded on Sunday after the first slate of games. And so the focus of this episode is going to be on that early slate of games. And we're in person. So Pat is sitting right here next to me. And this is a good change of pace. I like this a lot more than virtual.
Yes, we won't be talking over one another for once. So for all the...
We're not going to do what?
Exactly.
All right, so we want to get this kicked off with our question of the day, like usual. And we were checking out the power rankings, and that's where our focus for this question is going to be. So the question is, what team's power ranking is not reflective of who they actually are? And this is going to be based off of, week one and then this current slate of early games we just went through. Pat, you want to go first?
Yeah, so we just watched the first round of games, and unfortunately the Steelers got... In my opinion, the Raiders ran all over them. They didn't even have a running game, which is kind of, ironic. But for the most part, the Raiders dominated the football game from what I saw. And according to CBS, they had the Raiders at 16. And I don't think that's really fair. I think the Raiders are better than what we suggest. I think people didn't like Derek Carr for whatever reason. Assumed Henry Ruggs wasn't going to do anything this year. Assumed Bryan Edwards was a dumb pick. Everyone's like, well, it's going to be Darren Waller. He's going to be the entire offense. And he is, except for the game against the Steelers where he literally did nothing. And the Raiders still went all over Pittsburgh's defense. Now, granted, Joe Hayden was out. TJ Watt got hurt. Devin Bush wasn't playing. But that doesn't matter to me because the Steelers are still a good enough defense that even with those guys out, they should still beat a mediocre team. And that's not who the Raiders are. So ahead of them, CBS had the Dolphins, the Broncos, the Ravens, who are probably going to be 0-2 by the end of tonight, unless you follow our puppy picks, which everybody likes the Ravens if, they have a tail. So I think that the Raiders were put a little bit low. And I don't think that's fair because I think people talk down on Derek Carr. And from what I saw, he's not the best quarterback, but he's pretty competent. And Henry Ruggs was actually a burner. And I think that the Raiders are going to have a really good team down the road.
Yeah, I was one of the people who was very against Carr. After watching him Monday night against the Ravens, every single pass was overthrown or underthrown. And, I gave him some crap for that. And he just seems like a middle, he's the average quarterback, but I think he's kind of heard that way too long and he's upset as he should be. But to me, the difference maker for the Raiders is that defensive line with, Max, and he's just an animal, and the Steelers offensive line could not handle it. They got in on the rush early. Najee basically went nowhere. Anytime he tried to run the ball, there were very few holes to go through. Najee seemed to make a lot of his work in the passing game where he scored that lone touchdown. But other than that, the Steelers should have stepped up. So honestly, maybe the Steelers are a team we should talk about as far as, not being up to their power ranking. But I agree. The Raiders are being underrated here. Currently, looking at this, I'd put them above the Dolphins. I'd put them above the Broncos. The rest, maybe not so much, but, we'll see how these rankings change. And we are using CBS's power rankings, by the way. I know every site does it a little different, but that's who we're checking out here. And so for my pick, I'm going to go with a team who I think is overrated. And I spoke about them in our very first episode. They're a team that I don't think is going to make the playoffs, and that is the New Orleans Saints. Now, everyone was hyped up about them as they should have been after they completely demolished the Packers. Their defense looked amazing. But they disappeared during against the Carolina Panthers and let Sam Darnold, Christian McCaffrey, and the crew just kind of take them to town. Jameis didn't really do anything. I believe like the last time I looked at the game, he was under 100 passing yards or something like that. So he got 111, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 26.9 passer rating. So that is a problem going forward. The Saints need to decide who they are as a team. But who they are as a team is not the number 6 team in the NFL. I would easily rank the Seahawks above them, the Bills, Packers, even though they beat them. I know that's probably how these power rankings are made, by who beats who, which, I mean, sure, that makes sense, but it's hard to write off the Packers after one loss.
Yeah, I agree. And, just a comment to Sean Payton, Jameis Winston did outrun Taysom Hill. So I would like to say that Jameis Winston is the starter because even though he only threw for 111 yards, he still did rush for 19 yards. So he does have that gadget type of playmaker ability. The Saints need a quarterback because they have nothing else going for them. But I do agree that there are a lot of teams like the Bills and the Packers and the Browns who are much better than the Saints in terms of like a whole team. And they're not being given enough credit just because they have a loss or it was closer than what it should have been. I mean, the Browns gave the Chiefs a good game. Like, I don't think that they should be punished because they're playing, one of the best teams in the NFL.
Right. Yeah, it's power rankings are a strange thing to begin with. They can be pretty arbitrary, but those are definitely some misrankings there. So now we're going to run through these first slate of games. We're actually going to start with the Thursday night game where we had the Giants versus the Washington football team, and in a game that actually turned out to be kind of exciting. I was honestly going into it expecting low scoring. I believe we actually bet the under, but it was an overall pretty good game, and it showed that Daniel Jones is actually the running back one for the Giants, which is a shame because of all the teams I have Saquon on this year round. They just don't want to run him into the dirt, and sure, I understand, but come on, Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I think that the reason that this game kind of worked is because you had two guys, and we kind of attributed this to Derek Carr as well, who kind of get talk a lot of crap on. I mean, people didn't like Taylor Heineke. I saw him in Old Dominion throw for 1,000 yards and 23 touchdowns in one game. And I'm like, this guy's probably going to have a really good game in the NFL one day. And he did. If you follow him on Instagram or anything like that, he has some pretty crazy lifts. So I highly recommend following him on Instagram because he's going to be this year's starlet. He's going to be a future type of Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's going to be that guy who just kind of shows up and plays really good football. And everyone's like, why don't we play him more often?
He just ends up under the radar. Yeah, he didn't look bad. I was really worried about Terry McLaurin going into this game because, we know Fitzpatrick as a gunslinger, a guy who likes to throw to his wide receivers and no one else. And I'm like, oh, Terry's going to have a terrible game. He had 15 targets, 11 receptions, 107 yards, and a touchdown. Is he the wide receiver one right now? He is the wide receiver 2 below Cooper Kupp at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that Taylor Heineke's performance showed you that you're not going to get anybody who's going to come in and flash you with speed or flash you with this throwing ability. And Taylor Heineke might be able to trip over the field more than he completes touchdown passes, but it's highly possible that Terry McLaurin is not going to really have any type of fantasy devaluation with Ryan Fitzpatrick out.
Yeah, they stuck to their game plan, which seemed to be get the ball to Terry. Now, that might be because this was a bit closer than they expected, but their passing game was on point, with Terry McLaurin and maybe even more so with J.D. McKissick. As an Antonio Gibson owner, this was very annoying to see McKissick get all of the passing work, but that's what he's known for. And he looked good, and he looked good sitting on my bench, which is really annoying, like I said. But going to our bets for this game, I believe we only took Washington to win. We, meaning Pat and I, agreed on the bet. However, the model picked Washington to win. Under 40.5, which it was not. It was 59 total points, and Washington minus 3.5. So, 1 for 1 for the Sleeping with the Numbers host, 1 for 3 for the model.
Yeah, and I think what we're starting to notice with our model is we're being not super lenient in terms of the over and the under. I think when we are very close, we're within 1 point, and that's the majority of the time that the model picks. But there are just some wild games, and I think that that's something that people have to realize. Football's not a numbers game. At the end of the day, anything can happen, especially when you have a backup quarterback, and nobody knows what the game's going to do. And they probably projected the under because Taylor Heineke's never really played in the NFL, but who knows what's going to happen. I think down the road, Washington's numbers will probably be adjusted, and that won't happen again.
Yeah, kind of looking into the mind of the model. The way I think about it was they see Washington with a fantastic defense who doesn't allow a lot of points to be scored. And then they also see the Giants, who is normally not a high-scoring team. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably how it decided on the under. But it was a lot more even in terms of over-under picks this week, which is a good sign because last week in week 1, I think we only had 2 unders or something like that. Both of them hit, so yay. But it was just kind of an over-exaggeration while betting this over. Moving on to the next game, we had a high-scoring shootout between Denver and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Denver won that game 23-13. Looking at the points, Trevor Lawrence had yet another bad game, and I'm just going to already blame it on Urban here because he cannot handle quarterbacks. And, maybe he should take that USC job. I'm sick of seeing him. But Trevor Lawrence, 14 for 33, 118 yards, 1 touchdown pass, 2 interceptions, and he also rushed for 21 yards. And on the other side of the ball, you had Teddy Bridgewater, 26 for 34 for 328 yards, 2 touchdown passes, and 1 yard rushing. So we talked about it last week. Jerry Jeudy is going to be out for an extended period of time, and we're like, okay, who's stepping up? We talked about kind of being worried about Courtland Sutton. He looked like he was scared coming off a major injury. That's completely understandable. But this game, he turned it up. He got 12 targets, 9 receptions, 159 yards, no touchdowns. Didn't need them. But he looked fantastic, and it's easy to see why he was a number one guy before the injury and why he should be the number one now.
Yeah, I think for me, we have 2 leagues that we're both actively involved in. We have a keeper and a redraft. In our redraft, I have Courtland Sutton, and I picked him assuming later down the road, as the season progressed, he'd be fine, he'd be healthy, he'd be the number one and kind of pick up the pace. And I'm glad that I started him today. He ended up in NFL.com scoring 20.4 points, and I was debating between him and Nelson Aguilar. So I'm like, the Patriots are going to throw all over the Jets. Why would I not start Nelson Aguilar? And I'm glad I didn't, because Nelson only ended with 3 points, and then my other option was Darnell Mooney. The Bears won, but he only ended with 9. So I think we're starting to see that even though Noah Fant contributed a little bit in Denver, that absence of Jerry Jeudy really puts a lot at Courtland Sutton's plate. And I do want to address a comment about Urban. I think it's unfair for you to say that he doesn't know how to handle quarterbacks, because I think every Ohio State quarterback to ever come into the NFL has been highly successful, and Justin Fields will be the MVP next year. And that is 100% sarcasm.
I was going to say, okay, name one.
Troy Smith. No.
Troy Smith.
Terrell Pryor. Who else?
Oh, boy.
Kirk Herbstreit.
I got a Pryor story. So
Okay.
I have a good friend I work with now. He went to Ohio State the same time Pryor was there. And after they won the national championship, Pryor went into his cell phone and texted every girl who wants to fuck the champ. So
Yes.
that type of guy that he is. So, maybe it's a good thing he's not in the NFL anymore. Going to the model, going back to more professional things here. The model had Denver winning, which they did. They had over 45. However, it was a 36 total points scored game. The model also put Jacksonville +6, and they lost by 10. So perfect on picking the money lines, not so good on the over-under spreads just yet. The next game here, a game that I believe when I talked about this when we were going over the model picks, I thought this was a horrible line set. I believe Buffalo was only 3.5 point favorites, and that was just absurd. Because of the loss to the Steelers, the tanking of the numbers there is just ridiculous. So I'm glad that I personally took this bet. That ended up very well. The Buffalo Bills ended up winning 35-0. Now, this is a game Tua did get injured, and they had to bring in the backup. And I can't even Jacoby Brissett, who went 24 for 40. So Tua got hurt pretty early. 24 for 40, 169 yards, an interception, 8 yards rushing. Well, Josh Allen really didn't have that great of a game either. 17 for 33, 179 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and maybe what bails him out is the 35 rush yards. And looking at these stats here, maybe a reason he didn't look so good for fantasy was because his running backs actually did some work. Devin Singletary, 14 attempts, 87 yards in the touchdown. Zach Moss, 10 attempts for 37 yards, so way less effective there, but he got 2 touchdowns. So both of their running backs doing a lot of work, which is usually not the case there in Buffalo. Do you think that trend continues?
I think for me, it's really going to be dictated by the game plan. I think what I saw with Josh Allen playing the Steelers was a guy who just didn't have protection. I didn't think that anything was really off with him. I know the announcers during the game wanted to say, Josh Allen doesn't have the timing they used to have. He's not as accurate. I didn't really see that. I saw a guy who was under pressure and he did his best, and the Steelers did a really good job of containing Stephon Diggs. I think that if the passing game gets hit early for Buffalo, I think that Josh Allen's going to be hot like always. So if I was in a fantasy football situation, which I'm considering doing in our redraft league, I'm going to go after Josh Allen right now because I think people are looking down on him and they're saying, oh, last year's a fluke. I don't believe that. Like, the talent is there.
Yep.
But when you're beating the Dolphins 35-0, he's not throwing 50 times. That's not realistic. He only threw for 33, which is still a decent amount. But for him, I mean, he's not going to throw 50 points in fantasy if he's only throwing 33 times. So I don't see that trend lasting for very long because we know Devin Singletary historically is decent, but he's not, maintaining that type of workload.
And, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves because maybe we talk about it for the fantasy episode, but I think that's a great target. That's a great buy low target. I actually traded for Josh Allen this past week. I didn't go out and make this trade. The guy came to me with it. So I ended up trading Austin Eckler and Kareem Hunt. I'm pretty solid at running back. I did not have a quarterback. And he gave me Damian Harris and Josh Allen. So I'm pretty happy with that. It makes my team overall better. So I'm excited for that going forward. And definitely the Josh Allen owner is probably upset because you had to take Josh Allen in the third or fourth round, something like that, to get him.
Yeah, especially if Mahomes goes early. I've seen him go a little bit earlier, like end of the second, but that's very rare.
Yeah, so people are going to be panicking after 2 weeks of, it's not killing you, but 2 weeks of less than expected from Josh Allen. So if you're in a league where you have a Josh Allen owner who's upset, help him out. Take him off his hands. So going to the model, this is same story. We hit the money line, Buffalo money line, over 48. Did not hit. It was 35 all by Buffalo. So maybe if Miami wanted to play, would have gotten a little closer there. And then, of course, the Miami plus 3.5 did not hit. Now, we did not take those bets. We thought immediately those were absurd numbers. But the model, doesn't have that insight.
Yeah, and I think if Tua would have finished the game, that over might have been a little bit more attainable. So I don't think that that's really fair to bust the model on because it was 35-0. That's not really what was going to happen in its eyes.
Moving on to the next game, and one that was probably a lot closer than anyone expected. It is the Cleveland-Houston game. So Cleveland was 12.5 point favorites. We took, and I say we, meaning the host here and the model, took Houston plus 12.5. So those double-digit spreads are usually ones I like to take for the underdog just because that's a lot of points. And these guys are professionals. Yeah, I mean, Buffalo just blew out Miami, but there was a lot that had to happen in order for that blowout to occur. We just talked about they lost their starting quarterback, and Jacoby Brissett has never really been a starter that's going to lead a team to victory. So, you don't just predict injuries. It's a tough thing to do for most players unless you're, Raheem Mostert. I need like a zing. Yeah, But either way, this game was actually kind of full of injuries. There was a time where Baker looked like he was not going to come back in. It looked like he got landed on pretty hard, but he came back in. He had a great game, actually. He was very effective, very efficient. 19 for 21, 213 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But he didn't need to be great because he has Nick Chubb, who went 11 for 95 and a touchdown. And that put them up. And, when Tyrod was in there, Tyrod did get injured and have to be replaced by the rookie Mills. It was a game. It was actually a shootout. It was going back and forth. But once the rookie came in, it was kind of a different story, and Cleveland was able to take their lead and win the game 31-21. So, we talked about it last week with Houston. Are they a legit team? I would say they're not as bad as what people assume, but are they okay when they're all healthy?
I would say they're at least competitive. And we talked about this as well, as I thought that people were kind of talking trash on Tyrod, and Tyrod is not great by any means, but it goes back to that Derek Carr conversation. Like, if I'm a team and Tyrod Taylor is my backup quarterback, which in reality he is, Deshaun Watson is still the number one quarterback, even though he's not actually on the Texans in reality. Tyrod's not supposed to be the starter, and Tyrod's still a good backup. So if I had him as my backup, I would not be concerned. Not great, but he's at least competent. He did have, a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown before he got hurt. His passer rating was 144. He went on 10 for 11. So and that's against the Browns. People want to make fun about the Browns, but the Browns actually have a really solid defense. So I think in reality, the Texans are competent. I don't think that they're going to, still go above 500. I think that that's still realistic, especially if Tyrod's out, because we know that Davis Mills is trash. No offense, but he really is. I don't see, Houston lasting without Tyrod, but with him in there, it's worth, talking about if they can cover, which in this situation they did.
Yeah, they've covered both games he started, and I actually talked about it with Neil when we were talking about prop bets. Tyrod came into this game with a better passer rating than Baker did. So, that does say something there. But the Tyrod to Brandon Cooks, that connection has been fantastic. So if you picked up Brandon Cooks, in those middle rounds, he's been a solid starter for you the whole way through. So model went 3 for 3 on this one. Cleveland for the win, but that was a minus 655 odd. So we didn't bet on that because the risk is not worth the reward for those massive odds. Houston hit to cover plus 12.5, and then the over did hit. There was 52 points, which is over 48. So 3 for 3 there. Happy with that. Next game we got another AFC North team, Cincinnati Bengals against Chicago. And actually, I did not see this final score. This is kind of funny. The last time I was looking, Chicago was blowing Cincinnati out of the water. And I'm actually kind of surprised by this box score here. So Chicago did win 20-17. And that means, I believe, let me just make sure in the bet, that Cincinnati covered. No, it was a push. So Cincinnati plus 3 was the line there. So got a push there. No one really looked good in this game. It was kind of a defensive struggle on both sides of the ball. Andy Dalton went down, which allowed Justin Fields to come in, and he also did not look great. I don't think Fields did enough in this game to start the next one.
I agree with that. And one thing, I kind of mentioned it earlier when we were talking about my debate over starting Cortland Sutton is, Darnell Mooney was a guy that, after myself listening to some other fantasy podcast experts, he's a high target guy, and he has a really good opportunity to receive a lot of fantasy points because he does get open very well. And he did lead the team in targets with 8. So I would say that if you're in a league where he's still a free agent, you might want to grab him because Allen Robinson, who's the clear number 1 receiver, only had 4 targets and 24 yards. So I don't know if that's something that's interesting to a lot of people, but for me, those are the guys that I go after because if Darnell Mooney has 1 or 2 good games, then he's trade bait at that point, and it may not matter. And you shouldn't have to really bid a lot on him because people don't know who he is at this point. But I agree with you. I think Andy Dalton still should be the starter. He did lead the game 9 for 11 with a touchdown, which is a 118 rating. So Andy Dalton's a pretty decent quarterback. I mean, we saw it with him at the Bengals, and even when he played for the Cowboys, he's still competent. So I wouldn't rush Justin Fields just for the sake of, Andy got hurt, so now's the time. You don't want to, like we talked about, predict injuries or hope that people are hurt for longer than what they need to. So you shouldn't do that to Andy Dalton because I think what would happen is it would become another Colin Kaepernick situation where you have a quarterback who Alex Smith deservedly should have been the starter when Colin Kaepernick came in. Now, granted, Colin Kaepernick was a good quarterback, but then you have this more of a debate of who the starter should be rather than doing the right thing and letting the guy who has the spot and has no reason to get kicked out of that spot, just sit because he's not like the shiny new toy.
Yeah, exactly. And looking at the news here on Andy Dalton, there really isn't anything new. He did leave with a knee injury, and as we know, knee injuries are always pretty scary. So personally, if he is not injured to the point where he needs to be sat, I would still start him over Justin Fields at the moment. I think Justin Fields obviously should be the future, but I still don't like Ohio State quarterbacks. So, looking at the stats here. So, like you read off Dalton's stats. So, Fields, not good. completed less than 50% of his passes for only 60 yards. They kind of were able to lean on the run game here, kind of run out that clock. Whereas on the other side of the ball, they were playing down. So Joe Mixon didn't have incredible game. He did okay, but he's still the workhorse there. He got 20 attempts, only 69 yards off of that. But Joe Burrow did not look great, even though looking at his wide receivers, they did okay. So he only completed 19 passes. Higgins got 10 targets for 6 receptions, 60 yards in the touchdown. He did fumble, though. Tyler Boyd got 10 targets for 7 receptions and 73 yards. Jamar Chase only got 4 targets, caught half of them for 54 and a touchdown. So if you started any of those wide receivers, you were probably pretty happy in any type of PPR format. Jamar Chase, a little lower there, but still not a terrible game by any stretch for those guys. And we slightly covered it, but just going over the model picks again, they picked Chicago to win, hit that one. Did not hit the over 45. They only got 37, and we pushed on the spread. Another game here that maybe some people thought was going to be a blowout, but San Francisco versus Philadelphia. So this game was a lot closer than it was going to be on paper. Let's see what they were favored by. 3.5. Okay, so maybe not that big of a spread, but I looked at this and I was a little surprised it was so close. Yes, the Eagles looked good last week, but who did they play? They played the Atlanta Falcons, who, are not that great of a team. And, the same can be said about San Francisco. They played Detroit. That game should not count at all when you're trying to rate these teams. Now, the big takeaways for this game was the run game for the San Francisco 49ers. We know Mostert is out for the season. Elijah Mitchell somehow ends up the guy to go, and he got hurt. JaMycal Hasty got hurt. Trey Sermon got hurt. Everyone got hurt. So there is a curse in San Francisco if you are a running back. And Elijah Mitchell did come back. He was the only running back to come back from these injuries. So I don't know what to expect from their run game going forward.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, Jimmy Garoppolo ended the game with 11 carries, which is kind of ridiculous for a quarterback when you think about it.
Especially him.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for the 49ers to kind of be that possessive team, which we kind of talked about how Jimmy Garoppolo is a good quarterback, but he's not going to get 400 passing yards in a game. He's going to have 200 or 300, be really consistent. They're going to run the game. It's going to be a well-balanced attack. That's not going to happen anymore. I mean, and if I'm, on this train of trying to pick up guys for fantasy football, I'm looking at, I don't know, Debo, if he's still available. JaMycal Hasty ended the game with 4 receptions, even though he's hurt. If you can get a wide receiver for the 49ers, they're going to be throwing the ball. And I think that's going to change how the model sees things too, and how people project the over-under, because San Francisco went from a team that, isn't really like a high-powered offense. They're good. They have a good defense. They can dominate the game. But if there's no running game, Jimmy Garoppolo is not a scrambling quarterback. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Lamar Jackson. So they need to throw the ball, or they're basically going to run nowhere. We kind of saw it with the Raiders today. When your star running back's out and they say, well, we have Peyton Barber, it's going to be fine. It wasn't fine. They ended the game with like 10 rushing yards or whatever it was. That's what's in store for the 49ers down the road if all those guys stay out.
Yeah, and that's a scary situation for them. And, as you say that, is Jimmy Garoppolo just a younger Phillip Rivers where he cannot scramble, but he'll chuck it down to like a Austin Eckler every play and happily do that?
I think it's fair.
And another thing that happens here with the wide receivers, Debo digs his feet in more as the solidified wide receiver 1 for the team, at least while Jimmy is still the starting quarterback. Brandon Ayuk is just gone. He got 2 targets, 1 reception for 6 yards. I don't know what's going on in the wide receiver room. Shanahan sounded upset with Ayuk. He's like, oh, he needs to play better than the guy behind him. And I don't know what that meant, because the guy behind him is Trent Sherfield. And I can't say that he's better than Ayuk. So I don't know if he did something off the field or in the locker room. Shanahan just mad at him. But there is no other wide receiver to own except for Debo. Even Kittle did not look great. 4 for 4. Well, okay. he looked good. He was not looked at. Jimmy just wasn't go to him. All of the targets went to Debo.
Yeah, I think going forward, until something changes in San Francisco, if you're looking at betting overs or any type of offensive props, I would avoid San Francisco entirely until they show something else. Because right now, you have a team that's probably going to win. So if you want to do money line, then great, go ahead and pick San Francisco because they're a great team and they have a good coach. But don't touch anything over or anything like that because right now the offense just seems like it's all Debo Samuel.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, Jalen Hurts, not a great game passing. It's a little harder when you're not playing against the Falcons. He went 12 for 23, 190 yards. But as we all know, he makes his fantasy points through his legs. He rushed for 10 times for 82 yards and a touchdown. He also got a target. Oh yeah, they tried to do the Philly special. It did not work. It was actually very poorly executed. But either way, you're going to start Jalen Hurts for fantasy, and that's kind of the only conversation we have to have here about the Philadelphia Eagles. No one else really looked good. Devonta Smith, who had an amazing game last week, got 7 targets for only 2 receptions. So rough there. Most of that blame is probably on Hurts. Not being accurate with these balls being thrown, but there's no one else you want to touch on this team for fantasy. So looking at the bets we had, the model had San Francisco winning. They did. We had under 50. That hit. Only 28 total points scored, but they did have Philadelphia covering, which they did not. We really needed that field goal there at the end, but they could not make it. So 2 for 3 there. That's not bad. We'll take that. So another game here that we slightly touched upon when I was talking about the Saints and how their power ranking of 6 is not accurate. So the Saints lose to the Carolina Panthers in a divisional matchup 7-26. And nobody on the Saints looked good. There's not a single player for fantasy in the double digits here. Jameis went 11 for 23, 111 yards, no touchdowns, but 3 interceptions. He did get a rushing touchdown that gave him, his only points here, 9.34. Taysom only got 2 rush attempts. Kamara did nothing. 8 attempts for 5 yards, 7 targets, 4 receptions for 25 yards, and that's it. There is nothing else to talk about here. It was a slaughter. And I don't know what happened to their defense, Pat. I mean, there's some fantastic talent on the Carolina side of the ball, but New Orleans comes in here off a big win against Green Bay, arguably the highest powered offense in the league, and they shut them down. Are we saying Carolina has a better offense than Green Bay?
Yeah, I think that we talked about Green Bay being a fluke last week, and I think that we saw from the eye test that, it was just a fluke. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is done. I don't think Devontae Adams is the worst receiver in football. Aaron Jones deserves the extension that he got. I do think that, at the end of the day, the model will be right, because we have Green Bay minus 10.5, Green Bay winning the money line in an over 48. I think the only thing I'm concerned of is the over, because I do think that I was concerned with Green Bay not doing well, that it might be a closer game than what we think. And we know the Lions offense is good, but we're not really sure if it's real or not because 40% of the passing attempts went to the running backs, which is kind of crazy. So I'd like to see how that game plays out. But I do think at the end of the day that the Packers are better than the Saints. I think that they just had a bad game. And at the end of the day, we'll find out that the Saints are mediocre and will not make the playoffs like you predicted. But going to Carolina, something I just read that's kind of interesting. Carolina has outscored its opponents 33-0 in the opening half. Wow. So I think the thing that we really need to talk about is Carolina's defense really good, or do the Jets and Saints suck that bad?
I'm completely fine saying that the Panthers defense is good. Whenever they were losing, who was the guy that Luke Kuechly? Yeah. Whenever he retired, everyone thought that was the end of their defense, and they had a little bit of a struggle getting back. I mean, that guy leaves a big gap in your defense, and then you have a coaching change. You bring in the coach from Baylor, who's probably more of an offensive guy than a defensive guy. And, you struggle for a bit, but they look absolutely in sync. You said that about their offense. And I think the same can be said about their defense. And looking at the offense, they have weapons. They have a lot of weapons. Christian McCaffrey, who we all love. DJ Moore, obvious wide receiver one. Robbie Anderson didn't have a big game, but he's definitely a threat. They bring in the new rookie, Terrence Marshall Jr., who looks good for a rookie. I don't think anyone expects explosive numbers from him right off the bat, but he looks like he can grow into a great wide receiver. And then at the head of it is Sam Darnold, a guy that we kind of keep giving praise to. You and I talked about how we wanted him here in Pittsburgh. I talked with Neil yesterday about how Neil's like, yeah, I wanted him to come to Pittsburgh and be the guy once Ben retires. So I think Carolina might be a threat going forward if they keep this going. They have two, the first win that was against the Jets, revenge game for Darnold. But this was the real proving ground, and they did it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see at the end of the day if Carolina or the Saints are the number 2 team in the South, because we know Tampa Bay should be the outright number 1. But I think Carolina's making a good case to be the number 2.
It's not going to be the Falcons. We can say that. Where's that bet? We can bet on that right now. So looking at the model had New Orleans winning. They obviously did not. They had over 44. There was only 33 points scored. And then they took New Orleans to cover 3.5. Also did not happen. So 0 for 3 on that one. I think I don't know why, and I said it in a Reddit post that the model just gets I called it a statistical hard-on for some of these teams. And I don't know. I do know why. It's because the model bases everything on historical data. They look at last year quite a bit. And of course, last year, New Orleans with Drew Brees was a very high-scoring team. So the model kind of thinks that. And that's why please use this model just as a tool to help guide you. Don't look at it as an end-all, be-all, because it is not that. It's not meant to be that. It's meant for us to discuss. And that's what we try to do with these Reddit posts and everything. So 0 for 3 there. Our biggest hit of the day. Other than this next game we're going to talk about, the Steelers against the Raiders. So
I have nothing to say about this game.
We'll make this one quick. Steelers looked bad without TJ Watt. Defense didn't do anything.
And Joe Hayden.
Joe Hayden, yeah. Bush was also out. So rough game there. Raiders defense is fantastic. I can't say enough about their defensive line. Max Crosby is a real deal. And I'm kind of upset I didn't look at him for a possible defensive player of the year.
So I think one thing that I noticed during the game, and that you may have some input, is Chase Claypool bad, or is Hayward Jr. that great of a cornerback? Because what I saw was a guy who is over 6'5", if I remember, who's supposed to be the super athlete who would jump up for the ball, and he just kind of floated in the air, and Hayward just kind of come in and just – there wasn't even a fight.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if Claypool was if he had a bad game, or if he's just really not as aggressive as he needs to be with the type of body that he has.
He needs to press Y. If you're playing Madden, you press Y, that's the aggressive catch. And he's not doing that. He's going up trying to finesse it into his hands. He needs to jump higher. We know he has the vertical to do it, but he also just needs to latch on to the ball, because the way Hayward was getting it out of there was just by sticking his arm between Claypool's arms and just like karate chopping it out of there. And Claypool just didn't hold on. He needs to bring it to his chest. He's a big dude. He needs to be able to overpower these defensive backs.
Yeah, and something else that I kind of noticed as well with this team is, when Oakland got hot, they stayed hot. And I think we talked about this earlier, they don't need Darren Waller. I think everyone wants to say Darren Waller's the offense, but Darren Waller did really nothing. And we saw that Brian Edwards showed up, Hunter Renfrow showed up. Mm-hmm. The running backs didn't show up either, but Derek Carr found the open guy, which is all you need from a quarterback in this situation, especially when you're playing against a team that's missing 3 of its star players.
Yeah. Yeah, so Raiders looked really good. I don't know what their schedule is going forward. Yeah, so looking at the schedule for I keep wanting to call them the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders. They have the Miami Dolphins next week. That's a win for them, right?
Should be, especially if Tua is hurt.
Week after that, they have the LA Chargers. That one will be closer. I would expect the Chargers to win, but that will be close. Then they have the Bears. I think they win that game. They have the Broncos. I think they win that game. They have the Eagles. I think they win that game. Giants. Yep. Chiefs. Nope. Bengals. Yep. Cowboys. Probably not. Either way, the point I'm trying to make here is they have a pretty easy schedule going forward. And did we overlook them as a possible playoff pick?
I think we might have, because I think we assumed that the Chargers should win that division, and the Chiefs, or not the Chargers should win, but the Chargers and the Chiefs should be one of the two teams.
Mm-hmm.
If the Raiders do make the playoffs, it'll be as a wild card. I don't see them trumping either two of those teams, but like we just said, their schedule is kind of ridiculous when you look at it in terms of like the first two games, what we know now.
Yeah.
If Josh Jacobs actually comes back healthy, that kind of concerns me for the fact that the Raiders are balanced. Like we talk about this, like teams that have good balance, like the 49ers. They don't have to be the best players. Like Jimmy Garoppolo is not the best quarterback, but they're a really good team. And that, I feel like that's sort of what the Raiders will become, especially now that it seems like Henry Ruggs is getting his act together and that he's being competent. And, they kind of gave them crap for drafting Bryan Edwards and not using him, but he looks really good now. He had a touchdown called back against the Steelers, but I mean, he should have 2 touchdowns in 2 games. So
right, big touchdowns too, important touchdowns,
and they weren't like easy touchdowns. Like they were good plays. So I think that shows that the Raiders are at least on the path forward, and that they will be playoff contenders next year. Hopefully, to get some running help. But I mean, I think that we did overlook them a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe once we get to our halfway mark, maybe we go over these teams again and see what happens. So looking at it fantasy-wise, Derek Carr had a great game. He is third on the week at the moment with 24.18 points. And this is standard scoring, not no PPR, half PPR scoring. Kenyon Drake also had a decent game. He got 8 points, but you said it at the beginning. They didn't really have a run game without Josh Jacobs. Pass game looked good. Ruggs looked great. Got 20 points, 113 yards and a touchdown. Bryan Edwards should have had a touchdown, but only ends up with 3 receptions for 40 yards, so 5.5 points there. Hunter Renfrow, probably the more PPR guy, 5 receptions for 57 yards. And then Darren Waller was actually the tight end 2 for the team. Foster Moreau getting that touchdown and jumping him in points, 10.4 to 9. Now, on the Steelers side of the ball, Ben, very mediocre, 28 for 41, 295 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception for 14.8 points. Najee finally got on it this game. I think he looked weak in the run game, and that is definitely a blame on our offensive line. But in the passing game, he looked great. He got 6 targets, 5 receptions, 43 yards, and a receiving touchdown. So I think he looked great, and he can. I really think it's just up from here for him.
Yeah, I agree. And one other guy that I was impressed with in terms of, watching, playing aggressive, that's kind of what we knocked Chase Claypool for, was Juju. Like, he didn't really do anything, but the catches that he did make were Hines Ward-esque in terms of, like, it's not a great catch, but he's going to bulldozer over you. And I saw that, and that makes me feel, promised that the Steelers still do have a balanced passing attack. It's not going to be deep bombs to Claypool the whole time or little screen passes to Deontay. It's going to be a well-balanced. Like, you have every level of the field as an option for Ben. Yeah,
you can say what you want about Juju, but he does play with heart. And it's obvious he cares about the team. He wants to get a win, a Super Bowl win for Ben before. I don't think either one of them are here next year.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So going to the bets, model took Pittsburgh -5.5 and to win. Neither of those hit. Us as a host, we only took the over 47. That also did not hit. They got 43. So, we just needed that one more touchdown from Pittsburgh, and we would have got it. Or even that Bryan Edwards touchdown. We would have, if we're going to lose, run up the score. That's fine. So I only think we got a couple more games here. We have one more game. One more game. We have the LA Rams versus the Indianapolis Colts.
With your favorite quarterback, Carson Wentz.
That's right. How'd he do?
I don't know. I just like to pick on you. I didn't even look before we started.
All right.
20 for 31,
He did
247, 1-1. Yeah. Competent.
He did good for fantasy. For an NFL quarterback, I don't think he was great. They had to bring. He got hurt for a little bit too, so maybe that's why. They had to bring in Jacob Eason, who was awful, even worse. He went 2 for 5, 15 yards and an interception for -4 points. So luckily, no one started him. For this game, let me find the spread. It was coming into the game, LA Rams -4, Colts +4 point underdogs over under 47.5. And of course, the Rams were favored. And looking at this game, I think I talked about it briefly. I was a little surprised that the Rams were not bigger favorites after how they played last week. Now, yeah, sure, it was against the Chicago Bears. But overall, I was shocked it was only a 4-point spread. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I kind of wasn't, because I think people have already hyped up Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines as like this super duo. Because we talked about it, like last year, Jonathan Taylor was good, but it's a much different offense when you have Carson Wentz as your quarterback versus Jacoby Brissett. And not saying that Carson Wentz is the greatest quarterback of all time, but what I'm saying is like now you actually have a quarterback who can pass the ball, and it doesn't rely as much on those running backs. So Jonathan Taylor had another poor game. He ended with 51 yards. So I think that the reason that the spread was as close as it was is because I think people are still waiting for the Colts to kind of come out and like break out and like Carson Wentz is back and Jonathan Taylor's going to run for 200 yards, and that's not really what's going to happen. And I think that people deep down don't trust the Rams because sort of the opposite. They're like, well, Darrell Henderson's like the third running back in reality, and I don't want to say it. I took him and I made comments about this on our previous podcast, but he did end up with a touchdown. Sony Michel did have 10 carries, which is a little concerning. I said to handcuff him. If you did, you're probably doing the right thing because this is probably going to be a tendency from now on. But, looking at the model, I mean, I think that the Colts are still a good team. It's just, can everything come together? It seems like when one thing's working, the other's not, because Michael Pittman had a great game, but Jonathan Taylor did not.
Yeah, it seems to be one or the other here. And it was a competitive game, so maybe that's why the wide receivers kind of took over here. Even though, was it last week that their targets were all to the running back, or am I thinking of Detroit?
No, you're correct. I think the Colts were almost, a fair amount of targets to between Taylor and Hines. It was sort of the same concept as Detroit. Yeah,
so interesting here. We'll talk fantasy here for a second. So last week it was all Zach Pascal, and Pittman did absolutely nothing. Now Pittman comes in and he gets 12 targets, 8 receptions for 123 yards, and looked really good. Every time I turned on the game, it looked like he was getting the ball. So it might be one of those games where, or one of those teams where it's just flip-flops between who is the wide receiver 1, who's the wide receiver 2. And it's hard to start one guy here. I don't know if it's like a flip a coin, but are the Colts a team that can sustain both of them in terms of fantasy?
I don't necessarily know. So I look back at that previous game, and Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines led the team in targets 7 and 8 respectively. It looks like today, Michael Pittman had 12, Jack Doyle 8, Zach Pascal 6, and then everybody after that was 2 or less. And I didn't watch the game, so I'm not going to try to talk out of my ass. But what I'm assuming the problem is that Michael Pittman was having a really good game, and Carson's like, screw it, we're going to do this. And then Jacob Eason came in, and Jacob Eason didn't want to play football. So what I'd like to say is that I think you're right. I don't think that there's going to be a person on the Colts that we're going to pick. And if you have Jonathan Taylor, I would be highly concerned at this point, because it's one thing to have one bad game, but to have 2 in a row where you're less than 100 yards and you're considered an elite running back, which I don't know why he was considered elite because he only played 1 year. It's a little bit of Saquon Barkley part 2, maybe in terms of, what people project him to do.
Yeah, that is a concern. And when I was mock drafting and everything, he always went, in the first, end of the first. Rarely made it to the second, and that always surprised me. I never took him, even if he was available. I would take quite a few guys over him. I would take Aaron Jones over him. I did take Barkley over him. Chubb. I think all of those guys are better assets to have on your team than Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor was my favorite running back coming out of the draft, 2 years ago. That being said, the Colts offensive line was supposed to be a lot better than how they're performing, and it's kind of showing at the moment. Also, the split with the passing work going a lot to Hines is, problematic.
Yeah, and one thing going to the other side, again, we talked about, is Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp the number one? Cooper Kupp, 11 targets again. Now, Robert Woods had 9, but it's just kind of weird. Like you said, it seems like Matt Stafford and Cooper have this thing going on that we kind of weren't expecting, because it used to be opposite world whenever Jared Goff was at the helm.
Yeah. Goff's probably a little jealous there. Stafford coming in on this boy.
Yeah.
Did you keep Kupp?
I did not. Unfortunately, I chose Stephon Diggs, which I think will pan out in the long run. But,
right.
Kupp
looks great.
I really think I should have, and I kind of regret that. But it's, hindsight's 2020.
So that's going to do it for all of the games on that slate. We'll just give a quick update here on how these games are going right now. I'm pretty sure we already hit the over for the Minnesota-Arizona game. It is 30-31.
Yeah, they're playing flag football right now.
They're just letting them go. Well, they must be, because A.J. Green scored a touchdown.
Oh, boy.
So they let the old broken guy, get one in there. Let him get pushed in. So good for him. The other games, we got Atlanta, Tampa Bay at halftime. Tampa Bay is leading 28-10, and I believe they're covering 10.5. Dallas and the Chargers. Dallas is currently winning, which is a bet I took. 14-11. That's also at halftime. Seattle getting the leg up on Tennessee as they start the second half, 24-9. And then the other games we have left for primetime: Kansas City, Baltimore, and Detroit, Green Bay. Please check out our puppy picks for those. You can find those on YouTube, Twitter. We now have a TikTok. What is the TikTok, Pat?
The TikTok, I'm going to pull it up because, we are trying to, get with the times and hang out with the cool kids. It is just Sleeping with the Numbers. You can find us because it is only videos of dogs, and now one video of Dylan setting up his computer. So we are trending in terms of, what is the hot topic on podcasts. And we all have very cute dogs. So I think if you like dogs and, unlikely picks, because I will say that my dog picked the Lions to upset Green Bay tomorrow. Oh boy. A little bit shocked, but she is currently undefeated.
That's right.
She is doing better than the model. So what we really need to talk about is, do the dogs know everything?
I think they might, Pat. And, they were currently undefeated going into this, but all the dogs pick someone different for these upcoming primetime games. So someone has to be wrong. Unless there's a tie, maybe they'll all be right. Check us out there. You can also find us on Twitter at SWTN_podcast, on Instagram at Sleeping with the Numbers. We have a website, sleepingwiththenumbers.com. We have all of our bet picks there. I post DFS lineups there, 3 free every week. Those also go on our Twitter if you just want to find them there. And we're also on Action Network. All the links will be there. There's a link for the model itself, a link for the Sweatin' Podcast, which is the bets that Pat and I agree on. And then Pat and I each have our own Action Network that you can follow. So we will see you next time.
Take care.